Okay, guys, just wanted to go over and share a few comments about the Starlink video. Overall, very good. I think we touched on a lot of important stuff, but there were a few places that we maybe could have tweaked it or taken it a little bit further. And there were some um, kind of technical issues here that puts question on some of the, that would invalidate certain conclusions that we may have looked at. Okay. Um, all right. So Francine, overall, very good. Um, I think you brought in T-Mobile here, although I know you've said that they weren't really a substitute. They could actually be a partner, and I think that's part of the discussion that we could have here. There actually were a series of articles written that there's an agreement that's going on between Starlink and T-Mobile, as well as discussions with a few other carriers. In fact, Apple has already started using for emergency calls satellites to complete calls from remote areas. So there is some potential partnership there that we could maybe have taken a look at a little bit more, or explored a little bit more. Um, as far as the competition, I think one of the things that when we're looking at Porter's Five Forces, we have to remember is he talks about the rivalry in the competition. So, how likely is your competitor to want to cut your throat? And in this case, if I was to take a look at, say, Culper Systems or OneWeb and say how much would they love to crush uh, SpaceX, I'd say that's pretty high. And the intensity of the competition between them right now, they're all trying to get up as quickly as they can because there's going to be another discussion we could have had maybe is a potential first mover advantage here. Because once you occupy certain orbits, no one else can put stuff in those orbits. So there's a potential first mover advantage here. Um, as far as new entrants, too, yes, you're right. There's not going to be tons and tons and tons of them, maybe right out of the gate, because of you correctly identified the amount of cost that's involved in this. However, if I was in the aerospace industry, if I was Boeing, if I was United, if I was McDonnell Douglas, if I was anybody in the any of these related industries that were involved in defense or some of these other areas, I might be looking at this as a potential uh, attack, as a potential market, right? So Airbus, even. So these sorts of companies could be looking at this with the idea of coming in, and they could get the resources. There will be there's companies out of China that are looking at it, and there could be even groups that could be partially funded or at least subsidized in some part by governments. I would see this happening in India. I would see this happening with the EU. So there are there to say that there's no potential. I'm not sure. I question that. Um, okay. In fact, is talking about. I think you were right in that SpaceX gives Starlink an advantage. Right now, most of the other companies, I should say, that are trying to put LEO satellites out there, don't have their own ability to launch, and most of the competitors to SpaceX right now are sort of redoing their fleet of heavy lift rockets. So the only option for the government or for many of these other satellite providers is to use SpaceX to put stuff up in space. So they have a very strange position right now. And this is something if you kind of scan through the articles and Times in the Journal and the Financial Times of London, you would have maybe run across some of this stuff. Um, Power of the customer. You mentioned something about consumer pricing being not very available. So while I was listening to you, I grabbed um, I grabbed a grabbed the browser and just sort of went up to Starlink and said, here's my home address. How much is it going to cost me? So actually, they're fairly straightforward. It's going to cost me $90 a month from my location, and it's going to cost me $600 for the equipment and $50 in shipping and $41 in taxes. So my net to get started with Starlink is just short of $700, right? So I think they are pretty straightforward, right? So they're not really hiding it. Okay, Joe, you're right. Differentiation is important. I think the question would be, so how are they different than Kuiper? How are they different from OneWeb? How are they different from Telesat? I think we could have talked about that a little bit. As far as how many satellites, I think if you did even just a quick cursory look at even a Google search would have come up with that these guys have gotten over 4,000 satellites up there right now. I think the current number is like around 4,600, and they're looking for 42,000 satellites. So 500, according to the case, sure, but it's not where they are right now. As far as space junk goes, huge. Is it the Coupler effect? There's a name for the effect that we have, the problem that we have with space junk, where there could be the domino effect, and I think I have that in the other video, which, again, well identified. Maybe could have explored it a little bit more as to how much of a threat this really is. And between you and Ramona, you talked about demand, but we didn't really get a scope of what this demand is. You talked about that you could go out there and look for it, but it would have been good to maybe have taken the step to do that. As far as the Arctic goes, I think when you said that, it sort of triggered a couple things for me. When we are rolling out a global product like this, you may have different pricing in different countries. And I want you to think here more like pharmaceuticals, right? If you sell pharmaceuticals in the United States, we probably pay the most per pharmaceuticals in the world per capita, and we subsidize the pharmaceutical companies. I should say subsidize. The U.S. consumer is helping to pay down the cost of research between the U.S. and Europe. More the U.S. though, because even places like Canada set the prices for what pharmaceutical companies can charge for pharmaceuticals in that country. So if you had a blood pressure medication that you bought in the U.S. for $100 a month, that blood pressure medication in Canada, the Canadian government may decide that it's not worth for Canadians to pay more than $45 a month, not $100 a month. Why? How do they get away with it? Well, the pharmaceutical companies say, great, the Americans are paying for us to actually be in business. They're helping us capitalize our costs and giving us some sort of reasonable profit on top of that. The Canadians aren't helping us with that. All the Canadians are patina. They're just extra money on top of what we're already making. We're not going to sell it to them at $100. They won't buy it, right? But we can make some decent money by selling them the stuff at $45. If you tried to sell that pharmaceutical in India, if you charge too much, the Indian government has said, you know what we'll do? We'll make a copy of it ourselves, and we won't pay you anything. So you can either sell it at this price, or we're just going to make our own version of it and sell it ourselves in our own country. So many times they'll sell pharmaceuticals in other countries for less than what they sell it for here, because they see it as just extra money that they wouldn't otherwise get. So let's talk about Starlink. The United States, they're going to pay $90 a month. What if I was a poor rural farmer in central Brazil? Would I be able to afford $90 a month? No. But the satellite's flying over me anyway, right? It's just flying right over the top of my field every single day with nothing going on it. So if I gave them $10 a month, that'd be $10 they didn't have, right? And it really doesn't cost them anything because it's just electricity flowing through the satellite, which it's already doing. So they may decide to price it in different parts of the world just to get some additional revenue. with the idea that they're going to make most of their money from first world countries, particularly the U.S. and Europe. We didn't talk about the geopolitical issues here, which could come up, which right now the Russians hate Starlink because the Ukrainians are using Starlink for either free or for a very, very low price because of agreements with Musk. In fact, Putin has already suggested that he might consider shooting down Starlink satellites just because it's an infrastructure for the enemy. Okay, Ramona, you did good definitions on all the things that you talked about, and those are all good things. Could have gone in and actually done one. We could have gone in and said, this is the demographics, this is the willingness to pay. And how much you figure out willingness to pay. Well, how many people are spending $200 a month right now for geostationary satellites? Would they be willing to pay that same price for service that's twice as fast and with less latency? Probably, right? And by the way, that's how Musk actually did his pricing. Is he took a look at the cost of geostationary satellites and said they have terrible throughput, they have terrible latency, so if we came even close to that, we would be able to sell plenty of Starlink. Now, the other thing we didn't talk about here was the actual demand that they have, and they're kind of behind in the demand they projected, but that's not unusual for a startup. But guys, overall, and I forgot, I almost forget Saul. Saul, I know you struggled a little bit with the presentation of this. You kind of lost your way a few times. I think if you practice a little bit more before you actually record, that might help you. Another thing is I thought you had a bad premise to start with. Your premise was that we want to make this more affordable. Starlink doesn't care about making it affordable. That's not what Elon Musk is thinking about. This is not a social service. He's thinking about what will the market demand and how do I structure the pricing so that I can produce the amount of products that will make me the most amount of money. Now, pricing it low may not make me the most amount of money. This is the whole, this is a supply and demand curve. So if I charge nothing, I've got a lot of demand. If I charge a lot, I've got no demand. So I've got this sort of curve like this. And if it's free, I don't want to make any of it. But if it's expensive, I want to make a lot of it. So it goes in the other direction. And where these two curves meet, that's the perfect price. So you're looking to say, what's the type of pricing strategy that I can use to actually make money here? And again, we could go back to taking a look at what the competitors are doing and what people are willing to pay in order to stay connected. And it's not about, subsidizing stuff or trying to get in at the bottom. What you're trying to do is figure out how can I get this huge amount of people who are out there who may just live remotely. They're wealthy farmers who have thousands of acres. They may want some better satellite than geostationary. Or there are people who have vacation homes, ski chalets up in the mountains that don't get satellite. That don't get cable to their ski chalets. Or people with hunting lodges. Or people with vacation homes on the beach that just aren't well connected. There's plenty of people out there who are remote, who have money, and who are willing to pay. And so let's talk about how we price that. And yes, sure, are there poor remote people? Absolutely. Could we find a way to deal with them? But that's a secondary level. These guys are looking first to try to find a way to meet market demand, not try to create a social service. And I think that was you started with this premise of almost being a social service. Logic in your process, by identifying things like tiered pricing and subsidized pricing and pay as you go. But I think bad premise to begin with. All right. So overall, guys, though, not bad. A good attempt.